It is day 2 of our January video challenge, and today we're going to be creating a mood board for the new booth space that we saw in yesterday's video, and we're also going to be making a 3D model of the booth space. I am someone who is a very visual person, and I have a hard time figuring out how to lay my antique booth out when it comes to what furniture pieces to bring in and how many furniture pieces can fit in the booth. So one thing that I like to do is actually build a 3D model of whatever booth space that I have, and then from there I can get the dimensions of the furniture pieces that I currently have and load them into the antique booth on the 3D model. I want to start with the mood board first. I use Pinterest usually to look up a bunch of ideas, get some photos, and then I switch over to Canva to build the actual mood board. For this booth space, I'm wanting to do something very cottagey, but I'm also trying to lean sort of heavy into like folk art influences. German, Scandinavian, Swedish, Danish, things like that. I'm also really enjoying like a neutral mood board, but kind of a moodier neutral. So like the chocolate browns, maybe different warm earthy hues. So with those things in mind, let's see what we can find to inspire us for this new booth space. So I have a booth theme that I do for Gilded Goods, and I pick a theme for every season. So you can see we've got spring, winter, summer, fall. And I also have a Pinterest board called my base theme. This is all of the neutrals or all of the things that I'm wanting to carry all of the time, no matter what my seasonal theme is. And I think I'm going to make this picture here the main inspiration for the new booth. I love the wallpaper, I love the moodiness of the shot, a little bit darker furniture, and all of the textiles and the pillows. And again, in this photo, I'm really enjoying the brown transferware. Seems like darker furniture pieces and a lot of patterns on top of themselves. So I'm going to go through, do a couple searches, save some images that I think really fit for this booth inspiration into its own board, and then we'll go from there once I get done. As far as searches go for myself, I think about the things that encompass my booth and the design in it. So I look up things like moody cottage or European cottage or neutral cottage. I also look up vintage booth design or vintage inspiration. So you can really search in a way that is custom to your booth space. So let's search antique window display, since I have windows in the space and I want to see some ideas of what I might be able to do with it. Now there obviously looks a lot like there's like old window pieces that have been repurposed and window displays at the front of the store. I like this one. Now again, this is a front of store display, but I like all the chandeliers hanging at the top, and I also like how they've utilized the table and stacked a lot of stuff on top of it and underneath it. This could definitely be something I could do in the booth. Let's try looking up basket display. I really like baskets, and I think that I'm going to incorporate a lot of them, and I'm thinking about putting them up on that top shelf. This is really cute with the ladder and all of them hanging. I feel like baskets are just such a cottage core theme. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin this to our board. All right, I think I've got a good amount of images saved onto the Pinterest board, and now I'm gonna go into Canva and upload those pictures from Pinterest into Canva so that I can play around with them and look at them all together. So I've just searched mood board in Canva's search area, and it brings up a bunch of templates that we can use. I'm just going to look for one I like, and I think I will go with this one. Then I can just hit customize template and we can start working on it with our own photos that we downloaded from Pinterest. To replace these photos with our photos, all we have to do is go over to the upload section on the left hand side of our template area, and then we can hit upload files and choose the files from our computer to upload. While those are loading into Canva, I'm going to go ahead and use this little color palette on the mood board and change it to the colors I want to use. Now I'm using my brand colors, and you can pick whatever colors are inspiring to you or that you want to use in the booth. I'm also going to go ahead and change the font to something I like. This is just a personal preference. You don't really have to do this. Now all we have to do with our photos is just drag them into the areas that we want to put them in. So since my main inspiration was that one picture here, I'm going to put that in one of the bigger slots, and it automatically fits it so that you don't have to do any adjusting on it. Then I'm going to go grab the next one, and so on and so forth until they're all filled in. I try and place them slightly strategically so that when I put them on the mood board, there's a different variation in where the really dark photos are and the lighter color photos, or if I'm pulling in green, and it's spaced out in the design itself. And now we have our completed mood board. This is really helpful to use when you're going out shopping. You can print it out, bring it with you. So whenever I go shopping for paint colors or whenever I'm looking for curtains to put in the booth, I will refer back to this mood board. Now let's see if we can capture this type of style into our 3D model. The modeling software that we're going to be using today is called SketchUp. It is a free web-based software, so you can just sign up and use it for personal use for free. Oh my goodness. Hopefully this will give you a resource that you can also use for your antique booth. There's a little bit of a learning curve to it, but once you get the hang of it, it's not that difficult to be able to design something simple like a booth space setup. We can go ahead and get into SketchUp and see if we can incorporate the elements that we picked for our mood board into the booth theme. That way, again, we can get a visual for how it might feel and look with our own pieces in it. Once you go to the SketchUp website and create yourself an account, you can hit the create new to make a model, and it will bring you into this blank template with a person standing in it. I would recommend running this on a desktop or a very powerful laptop, as it can lag when you're working in it. So what I'm going to do is go over to this rectangle tool here and create the base of my booth. This is the easiest way to start a structure, and you're just going to want to put it on the origin and draw out the structure. Now you can't see it in my video recording, but on the bottom of the SketchUp page there is an area where you can type in the actual measurement, and it'll go ahead and draw out the correct dimensions for you without you having to draw it freehand. You definitely want to use the blue, red, and green lines that are in SketchUp, as those are the directions and the axes that keep your structure straight and level and plumb and whatnot. To move around in SketchUp, you've got the rotate button, which is the one I'm using now, and underneath that is the pan button, which will move your place within the model. Now that I've got my base, I want to go ahead and check the measurements. So what you can do is go into the bottom of the toolbar and use this measuring tape. You can click on the lines within your model and it will show you the length, the width, the height, anything you're really wanting to measure, and you can also make guidelines from this. I want to make this rectangle. I've created an actual floor, so I'm going to use this push-pull tool, and I'm going to pull 2 inches up to create just a 2-inch base for my model. Then from there I can go ahead and use the rectangle tool again to draw the walls of the booth. Now that I've got all the walls drawn, I will go ahead and use the push-pull tool again and bring them all up to height. And there we have the framework of our booth. This could be where you stop if you don't have any windows like I do. However, I'm going to try and make this look as realistic as possible, and so I'm going to mess with it a little bit more. I'm going to build the top shelf in my booth, which is where my sign will go and where we talked about doing some kind of display up there. And now I'm going to work on putting the windows into this booth. Windows can be a little bit more complicated because you have to draw out the area and then use your push-pull tool to eliminate that section of the design. But if you want to go a little bit more in depth into SketchUp and how to use it, there's a lot of really good tutorials on YouTube. But I'm just going to measure up from the bottom to get our 3/4 foot brick area that's there. And now that I've got a guide, I can use my rectangle tool to draw out an estimate of what the windows look like in the booth. Now that we've got the space for the windows, this is where it starts getting fun by loading elements into your design. If you go to this toolbar over here on the right, you'll see things like components, materials, and 3D warehouse. If we click into the 3D warehouse, we can then search for elements that other people have already built that we can just download into our 3D design. So I'm going to search for large industrial windows, and then I'll go over to the models section and I can look for specific designs that fit what I'm looking to put in this window space. And while this one isn't exact, it's really close, so it will work well in our design. I'm going to go ahead and download this into my design. And then we can use this little move tool to kind of place it where we want. We can use the scale tool to manipulate it into a size that will fit what we need it to. Once it's the right size, I can then just copy and paste and create multiple windows of the same size and place them into the design as well. And now it's really starting to look like my new booth space. I have the windows in here so I can play around with the setup and really get an idea of how it's going to look visually when I load it into the real space. From here we can go over to the materials section and add in finishes like brick, paint colors, flooring, etc. to really bring it to life. I just realized that I did not build my model to the specifications. So I changed it around a little bit, and now we can go ahead and load furniture pieces into the booth. The nice thing about being able to load in the furniture virtually is that I can change it around as many times as I want and see how it's going to look without having to do any actual labor. So for me, who is someone who is very indecisive, or like I said earlier, is really visual and needs an idea of what it's going to look like, this really helps save a lot of time once I actually get in the booth. So if you're like me and you like to play around in your booth space, this is something you may want to try with your booth space, though I do know that this might not work for every booth owner. This is how my booth model turned out when I fixed it to actually look like my booth. You can see that I forgot that the brick comes out on the walls before the windows. The windows don't take up the whole back wall. I went ahead and fixed it, and now we can get to the point of putting furniture into the booth. The same way we looked up the windows for the booth, we can look up furniture pieces. So if you go over to the 3D warehouse, you can then search whatever kind of furniture piece you want to bring into the booth. I'm going to go ahead and load in a couple pieces, and then we can play around with it. Now that I've got a few pieces in here, you can manipulate the pieces of furniture the same way you can the walls with the scaling tool, move them around, rotate them, and that gives you a lot of options when you're trying to lay out your booth with furniture pieces you already have. You can make sure that they are to scale with what you already own, so that way you know that they will fit when you put them in the booth. And you can get to the point of getting to something as complicated as this. I've loaded in some plants, a shelf I already have, a cabinet, chairs, etc. And I also added in the kind of faux fireplace that I was looking at doing from the Sugar Ridge Collection booth. I'm even able to add a rug onto the floor, artwork, and the shelf on the wall. That really makes it feel like an antique booth. Do you like this layout, or would you do something a little bit different with the windows or the furniture placement? I tried out a second option as well, where I put a little bit more detail into it. I put curtains in the window, mimicked hanging up some artwork along the back wall with some picture rail chain instead of trying to hang it on a solid wall, and switched some of the furniture around. But I hope that y'all can see the potential in using something like this for planning out your spaces. I'm pretty happy with how the model turned out, and I will be able to play around with it a little bit more. And as I get new furniture pieces, or as I'm trying to do new resets, I've got the booth built and I don't ever have to do that again. I can just load different furniture pieces into it. Overall, this took me less than 45 minutes to put together, and that was while I was trying to get the right viewpoints for the video itself. Like I said, it does have a little bit of a learning curve to it, but once you get the hang of it, I find it's a really useful tool for antique booth building. I know this video is a lot different from what I normally post on the channel, but I hope these resources help you out in your next booth reset, and I will see you tomorrow when we actually go implement this.